Hi everyone. So finally getting to the Q&A from the question box earlier this week. I wanted to start posting them on IGTV just so people can refer to them as a reference, or if maybe someone else asked the question that you've been wanting to ask, you'll have that question answered and something to refer back to, because I know in this journey there are so many layers, and maybe we tweak one thing and then something else pops up, or we change the way we're eating and then we start getting an itchy scalp. So hopefully this will start to bring some cohesion into the process for you all. And as always, I love these questions. I think they're kind of fun to start diving in. It's maybe my favorite part of this. Well, that's actually hard. But anyways, so first question, I'll be looking down at my phone, but why does eating fruit with meat make me bloated and gassy? So, for a lot of people on this journey, fruit actually might be more problematic when it comes to adding starches and carbohydrates back in. And for me specifically, I had a lot of trouble with the fermentable fibers in fruits. And even if a fruit tasted really good to me, oftentimes it was the fermentable fibers that would cause such extreme reactions of bloating. Thinking of things like apple and even very ripe watermelon can be so problematic for people because the little critters in our guts love those fibers. They love to ferment them. They throw a party whenever we eat them. So if you're having issues with fruit, it might not be the fact that you're pairing it with meat. It could just be the fruit in general. I'd be curious to see what foods you're reacting to separate, just so you can start to get a little bit of understanding what might be leading to what. So maybe it might be worth trying to add in more easily digestible carbs like white rice and really well cooked potatoes, and seeing if that could be helpful in this process. Let me know. What causes a dry scalp? Any mineral deficiencies or organ systems? So that's a really good question. Before we even dive into digestion and nutrition, I'm really curious what kind of water you're using. If you have a water filter, that could be causing some issues. If there's maybe too many minerals or even fluoride or all of the medications that seem to be in the standard water supply, something to look into if that's been an ongoing or recent issue. Also, curious what type of shampoo and conditioner and just body care products you're using in general and how often you're washing. But if it's like a dandruff, itchy kind of scalp, you said dry. I'm not sure if it's itching. Oftentimes, again, that could be related to something going on in the gut, which could be even an endotoxin issue where the liver is feeling a little bit overburdened and it's starting to show up in the skin. It could be an excess estrogen issue. It could also be just motility in general, maybe being slowed down by lack of thyroid hormone or lack of conversion if the liver is already overburdened. So curious if you're eating something new, if you've had a history of histamine reactions in general, or maybe even a history of eating very low carb or even carnivore-ish, and now you're adding carbs back in and your body might be reacting. I would say start to really go back to basics and add layer by layer. And when I say basics, I mean blood sugar balance. That's when I'm talking about finding ways for you that really balances your blood sugar. And everyone's different here, but you'll start to notice that you might need to eat even more frequently than you think you need to, and more balance, playing around with that carbohydrate to protein ratio just to see what your body prefers. Because, some people even get spikes with fruit combined with protein that just doesn't work for them where they're at in their healing phase. So being open to experimenting. In terms of mineral and deficiencies or organ systems, I'd be curious about copper. I'd be curious about magnesium, just thinking about how important magnesium is for the functioning of the body, in terms of it being essential for, I think 42% of the enzymes require magnesium as a cofactor to work. So if you're deficient, if you're used to being high stress, if you have a history of stress or trauma, this could be playing into just something not happening even on the level of the liver detox pathways. Phase 2 of the liver detox requires magnesium. Phase 1 requires zinc. So that's another component there. But based off of what I know about you, not to call anyone out here, I know you have a very nutrient dense diet. So it could be something about honoring that you might need more of magnesium right now, just honoring the stress that your body has been through and honoring, just the reactivity of your gut in general and giving it time to heal. What's the best way to get rid of chronic yeast infections? Strict food doesn't seem to help. I'm so glad you know that strict food doesn't seem to help, because when we think of chronic yeast or candida or fungal overgrowths in general, it's often a metabolic issue that starts with some kind of overwhelming stressor, and oftentimes low carb can set off this cascade of just the body feeling like it needs to ramp up stress hormones in order to free glycogen from the tissues. So it's kind of funny thinking about how a lot of these anti-candida diets recommend cutting out sugar, cutting out carbs, when in fact that might be increasing the stress load on the body and maybe exacerbating the issue. So to get to the root cause, I would say starting to balance blood sugar again. I know that's something we all talk about a lot, but really starting to have nutrient dense sources of easily digestible carbs that work for you. Again, you might be at the phase right now where really, really ripe fruits and honey and maple work really well for you. Or you might be the kind of person where really mushy white rice and really well cooked potatoes with a thick slab of butter might work better for you in terms of getting those nutrient dense carb sources up. And in terms of supporting the metabolism, thinking about the fact that chronic yeast issues do tend to show up when thyroid is not as robust as it can be. Again, supporting the thyroid with enough vitamin A, cholesterol, but then of course supporting the liver so that that thyroid can convert, because the majority of the thyroid is converted in the liver. So we want to make sure that our gut is moving properly so the liver isn't exposed to unnecessary amounts of endotoxin, and that it just has that low stress environment, that it feels safe enough to divert some of its energy to converting the thyroid hormone and letting that metabolic rate that governs our motility kick back up. So yeah, I would start with food frequency, nutrient dense carbohydrate sources, whatever you're craving, that could be a good starting point. And giving yourself time, because easier said than done with dealing with stress, and especially if you've fallen into the strict mindset of protocols and restriction of healing, that in and of itself can be traumatic to the body. I talk about this and write about this a lot, but whenever the body feels cornered into having to eat a certain way or else symptoms will come back, just think about how that stores in our tissues and stores in our fascia that not only is something wrong with us, but the only way out is to struggle and to be deprived of joy. Giving yourself, again, a sense of kindness and patience while the body starts to remember that it is safe and that healing can actually allow for so much more space and enjoyment of food. So that's what I do. Did you have a big moment of realization before you got better, or a slower process? Yeah, I have been reflecting on what helped me the most as I think about how to work with you all and how to be of service when I take out the nuggets of wisdom from along this funny path. But I had breakdowns over breakdowns over breakdowns over the years, and so much of it was just confusion, especially when I was still in the Western model of getting lab tests and GI panels and parasite tests and blood tests and tissue tests and urine tests. Every time I got a new diagnosis was like a breakdown where it almost felt like my world was shattered. It felt like the more results I received, not only the sicker I felt, but the more hopeless I felt, because I didn't see a way out. Everything was tied to everything else, whether it was the mold toxicity, whether it was the parasites, whether it's the heavy metals, whether it's the osteoporosis or the mast cell activation syndrome. It felt like, how the heck do I start to heal? Especially when I got to the point where I had lost all motility in my gut, and even the most nutrient dense pro-metabolic foods did not work for me. So when I think about the big moment of realization, it was when I was literally at the breaking point. I had just gotten back from a 2-week stay at the hospital of doing hyperthermia treatments for Lyme, hoping that that would be my ticket to abundant health and function, that I could finally get my body back. But I came home and I was so depleted, even just lifting my body up to move into the kitchen to start my day and to get some salted water. I was unable to even feel a sense of joy or vitality because my body just felt so toxic. It was like I was just moving around this big slug of a creature. So that was kind of when I realized, wow, life had become so precious to me, but it didn't seem like something I would be able to hold on to. And it was honestly, I think, when my husband, my then partner at the time, proposed to me, and I realized, wow, if I can't control anything that's happening in this body, if all of my experiments are failing right now, I'm going to start training my brain to focus on the beauty in life and not take this body so seriously. And in a funny moment of kind of surrendering to, okay, maybe I'm going to be sick, but I'm choosing to do the best that I can with this, that's when things started changing for me. And then to add to that realization process, I think it was starting to dive into the works of Ray Peat, where I realized that there was hope, that I thought I had tried everything, but I had not tried all of his ideas. So that opened up this world of possibility and experiments, and especially the carrot salad. That was a game changer for someone that had lost motility due to infection and just scar tissue and the gastroparesis caused by a lot of these Lyme and co-infections. That seemed to at least stimulate the colon enough to say, okay, even though I know you've lost all of this muscle tone and you're so inflamed that you can't squeeze food through, I'm gonna move food through anyways. So if you're at the point of figuring out what to do next and feeling kind of hopeless, I would say, as weird as this might sound, or maybe as cliche as it might sound, start to surrender into your experience and ask, if this is all there is, if this is my last day to be here, that memento mori kind of reflection, how do I want to think? How do I want people to feel when they're around me? If my body is sick, how can I arise above that or separate from that and still show up with this sense of grace and beauty and see what unfolds? It's I guess more of a tangled process than I'd like to even be able to acknowledge, but in stepping into it fully and saying, okay, life, let's do this thing, that's when you'll start to get these ideas about how to move forward, and it gets pretty exciting from there. I used to eat normally, but after an allergy test, I'm now allergic to milk. Is there any way back? Yeah, so I think allergy tests are kind of funny because they're basically showing you that you've mounted an immune response to a certain protein in the food you're eating, which is not necessarily a bad thing. These allergy tests too can also pick up on the fact that as the gut becomes leakier, little protein molecules will start to leak into the bloodstream. So of course your immune system will react to that because those protein molecules should not be freely circulating. So if anything, I'd say yes, the more you start to heal your gut and strengthen those junctions, you should absolutely be able to tolerate milk. And if you're not able to digest it, that's another thing. A lot of people lose the production of lactase over time, especially when the scar tissue builds up on the little microvilli all along the small intestine and they stop producing lactase. Again, milk is not the problem. Milk actually might increase your ability to heal because it's so nutrient dense and it has all of these anti-stress factors within it. So I would say keep adding it back in, trying out different varieties of milk, whether that's A2, sheep's, goats, or the more heritage breed cow, seeing how you do with different brands, staying away from the artificial adjuvants of vitamin A and D that you see often in pasteurized and lower fat milk products, because those in and of itself can be gut irritants, which are counter to our goals, and again, opening up those gut junctions, which not sure we want. I find that despite pairing carbs with protein and fat, I get spikes. Any tips? Fruit seems to be even worse. Yeah, so love this question because it honors the nuance in different bodies. People's gut microbiomes completely change the way you're able to digest and utilize your fuel sources. So again, carbs might work, or I should say fruits might work really well for someone and then not so well for you. So I think honoring, and I'm glad that you have a glucose monitor, because you'll get some data, which can be fun just to see what is working, what's not working. But so if you are truly balancing your blood sugar and eating more balanced meals throughout the day, I'm curious if you need even more fat with your meals to slow down that absorption. So you're not spiking and then dropping, but it's kind of a gradual raise in blood sugar and then a gradual decline. I personally notice that I do better with pairing starches and fruit at the same meal. But in the past, I did better with just starch and a lot of fat, which again is unique to everyone. But it depends, because starches can actually be absorbed much more rapidly. If you look at just the pure glycemic index of a potato versus an apple, the potato is going to have a much higher rating. But who eats just a plain potato? When you combine that with butter or ghee or coconut oil or, a big dollop of your favorite duck fat, that slows down the glycemic spike or the glycemic index. So I would start by adding in more fat, seeing how you feel, and going from there, one experiment at a time. But that's what I would do. Tips to increase T4 and decrease TSH. Yeah, so TSH can start to rise sometimes when we're under significant stress. It's basically the body's way of saying, hey, I'm having a really hard time converting this thyroid hormone. Increase TSH to help usher that process. So, of course, lowering stress. And when I say lower stress, I mean in all ways. And I think the nervous system is a great indicator of if that's actually working, because that's kind of our best metric if the body is feeling safe. So finding ways and processes that feel actually nourishing for you, forgetting what you see on Instagram, forgetting what these influencers are doing, but asking yourself, what actually feels like you can step into that place? And even if it's just a micro moment, because I do know very well that for a lot of people, it feels impossible to relax. I was one of those people in my most toxic states. I could be walking on the beach in a tropical island and just feeling so panicked. So pausing for a moment and really checking in and asking, what do I need right now to feel safe, I think is one of the most effective ways. And that's why I'm such a big fan of the brain rewiring work, because again, sometimes these stories are so deep rooted, we don't even realize that we're playing out these loops that's completely changing the way we're seeing our surroundings and maybe sending signals of doom and danger to ourselves. And when we start to question those and pull them out of the way we function, then we can start to see the world around us with this sense of novelty and peacefulness, and be able to actually feel lower stress. I would also say, just from a stress perspective, making sure, again, your blood sugar is balanced, making sure you're filling in those mineral gaps, because again, even just a lack of something as simple as magnesium could be causing the body to feel constantly panicked, constantly tense and stressed, which of course is going to be throwing off your thyroid. And going back to even the nervous system again, the nervous system is what dictates the metabolic rate, even more so than the thyroid, because the thyroid is picking up on those senses of danger and doom and panic and, worst case scenario thinking. So coming back to honoring what you may have been through, what may have changed the way your nervous system is working, and starting there. Can antibiotics affect the menstrual cycle? I would say yes. Everything we ingest, everything we think, how we're exposing ourselves to certain light forms, not certain light forms, our type of movement can absolutely impact the menstrual cycle, because again, I like to think of everything from a stress perspective. And interesting about the antibiotics, I think it could affect it in either way. So if you're someone with extreme dysbiosis and really high levels of bacteria and overgrowth, especially in the small intestines, antibiotics actually might support your menstrual cycle by lowering the amount of endotoxin that's being released by these critters, therefore lowering the amount that is burdening the liver. So by decreasing the endotoxin load, all of a sudden the liver has so much more reserves to start helping just detoxify the body and processing all these not so great byproducts out of the body, which means that estrogen can be more properly packaged up and shuttled out of the body. And in a lower stress state in general, I can start to see how estrogen would start to naturally decrease and the production of progesterone would naturally raise and not be shuttled into the cortisol pathway because the body's just dealing with less stress. But on the flip side of that, say you're not detoxifying well, you're not having bowel movements, and you're taking these antibiotics, maybe even high doses for far too long. This is something I went through, not having bowel movements again. That might be so stressful on the body that even though the idea is helpful, it could be increasing the load on the liver and then therefore causing systemic stress and worsening the menstrual cycle, maybe even delaying ovulation or skipping ovulation altogether, maybe having really intense, heavy periods again because you never had that wonderful burst of progesterone, or the progesterone started converting to cortisol and you're mostly estrogen dominant. So I'd be curious to know what type of antibiotic you're taking, if there's any fillers in them, how long, how much, and what you're trying to treat. Because I think there's a time and place, honoring the fact that a lot of the pharmaceutical antibiotics are pretty potent, but so are the plants. Anyone who's ever taken biocidin knows that plants are not joking around, and some of these plant compounds, while they're antibacterial, the oregano and thyme and garlic, can cause massive die-off reactions. So if you're not pooping, peeing, sweating, getting that out, that can cause a really intense Herxheimer reaction, which would of course throw off the menstrual cycle, because the body's like, we cannot carry a baby right now. There's too much stress going on. So I would say yes, absolutely. It can throw off the menstrual cycle in either direction. What do you suggest for an autoimmune flare-up? Yeah, so it depends what's causing the flare-up. I'd say most oftentimes it's either high levels of stress, especially emotional stress, or eating something that your body isn't quite ready to deal with, especially honoring the fact that a lot of autoimmune disorders stem from some kind of trauma and some kind of deficiency, especially magnesium, which Morley Robbins talks about a lot. But for dealing with a flare-up, I would say scale back everything. Clear your calendar and kind of go into restoration cocoon mode. So if you can take a magnesium bath, if you can get out on a gentle walk, get some fresh air and sunshine, if you can take a nap, if you can really fortify your nutrition right now with at least 100 grams of protein, really nutrient-dense sources of sugar, or even not nutrient-dense sources of sugar, paired with nutrient-dense foods like liver and egg yolks and bee pollen and shellfish, all those good things. And most importantly, just being patient with yourself, because I'd say the good thing about an autoimmune flare is that it shows you that, again, your body might need some extra support. And if you can step back and give your body that love and nourishment and kindness that it needs, that can feel really good if you let yourself step into that and luxuriate in that. So be patient. torn between wearing SPF for melasma on face or getting sun for vitamin D, also eating pro-metabolic. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Again, we have to honor that the body requires a certain amount of balance. And one of those things that is so life-giving in so many ways is natural light and keeping the vitamin D levels and magnesium levels, again, underneath that, at a certain amount of saturation in the body that the body feels resourced. So again, that's a personal decision. I know it can be hard to feel confident when skin issues are abound, but figuring out maybe what's at the root cause of that and titrating the sun, maybe getting sun in the morning and the evening when the red light is the highest. So you're still getting some benefit there. And being gentle with yourself, because I know a lot of people talk about melasma being tied to so many metabolic imbalances, but it could be something simple like relaxation again, and letting yourself slow down this process of having to figure out even what's causing the melasma and stepping back and saying, wow, I've actually been really, really stressed. That's when the melasma started showing up. Oh, it was when I was entering puberty and taking birth control pill. Stepping back and seeing where you can rebalance and trusting that your body will rebalance. And, you know, it's as much as vitamin D is important, it's also good to honor that we have evolved with maybe changing seasons and changing climates. So if your vitamin D level is dropping at a certain point of the year, especially in the winter, that might be okay, knowing that you'll be getting extra sun and goodness in the summer. So giving yourself some time. Tips to stop hair shedding, please. Yeah. So again, hair loss can be a sign, again, that there is some kind of massive stressor in the body, whether it's emotional, physical. There could be a deficiency in some mineral, especially when there's really high amounts of iron and not enough copper. Again, the body gets thrown out of whack and the cell almost loses its intelligence. So stepping back for a moment and seeing, what have you been through recently? What is your stress level actually like? And where do you need to tend to? Almost like your body's this garden. Where needs a little bit of work right now? But I often see this following caloric restriction, a severe life or a traumatic life event, even small T traumas that accumulate over time and shift the body into this holding pattern of panic and fear and doom. That can cause hair loss even 3 months after the event. So again, starting to slow yourself down and maybe diving into more of the nervous system work and brain rewiring work to let your cells know, hey, I know it's been rough, but I've got you. I'm not going to desert you. I'm going to take care of you, and we can do this together. But just to cover the basics, making sure you're getting enough nourishment. So really maybe even upping not only the nutrient-dense foods you're eating, but upping the calories in general, just to signal safety to the body. And this might mean eating more than you're used to, and this might mean actually putting on a little bit of weight. So I hope that helps. Soy equals estrogen equals no bueno, but what about fermented soy like natto or tamari? So natto actually is pretty cool because it's one of the highest sources of vitamin K, and it also has a really cool texture. And I think with pro-metabolic eating, there can be a little bit of dismissal of more ethnic foods and just traditional foods, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I like bringing in all foods and knowing that there's a time and place for them. So I think if you enjoy them and they're not causing issues, the fermented foods are so much less goitrogenic or problematic than just, eating soybeans or, straight up soy milk. I would maybe stay away from that, but tamari, again, is one of these foods that depends how you tolerate it. I personally love tamari, and I went many years taking it out, and when I added it back in, I didn't have any kind of histamine reaction or any ill effects. So it's something I do include and like to have. Also, swapping in coconut aminos whenever you feel like it too could be helpful, because we don't want to overdo any food. There's a time and place for everything, so honoring that. But if there's a reason you're craving it and liking it, maybe figuring out why. Is it the sodium you're craving? Is it the vitamin K you're craving? Where else can you get this nourishment from? And maybe that can start to fill in some gaps for you. What's your opinion on the bean protocol by Karen Hurd? This is the second time I've heard this question, so this is interesting. So I think it's kind of funny, not gonna lie, because I don't know if we need to be putting ourselves in protocols when really we just need to think about what feels nourishing, what is actually allowing me to create energy, what's allowing me to feel good, what's allowing me to think creatively, to be kind, to actually live a life that feels meaningful. So there might be some benefit in terms of the soluble fiber in beans if you don't have SIBO and you're not reacting to that, because again, that's pulling water into the colon, and a lot of the soluble fiber too is very fermentable. So if you have any kind of gut dysbiosis, probably maybe would not recommend the bean protocol. But also honoring you, if you love beans, if you've been craving beans and there's something in you that feels really interested in eating more beans throughout the day, you know, go for it. Experimentation. That's maybe the one diet I haven't tried, and I'm not personally the biggest fan of beans. I think I like them here and there, and kind of love the idea of black beans and really mushy rice and the fried banana and egg. But again, I like to get my nourishment from more nutrient dense, more digestible foods for me. But we're all different. Shilajit for heavy metals, yes or no? Yeah, so there's some amazing research on Shilajit. Again, I think it's one of those foundational supplements that could be really helpful, especially if you do have pretty high iron, or even if you're releasing a lot of ammonia, which is a natural process in the body as you break down protein, especially if you're eating a lot of plants and plant-based protein, that can create a lot of ammonia in the body. So I think Shilajit can be helpful, but even really basic things like coffee can help bind and excrete heavy metals by not only supporting the liver, but supporting glutathione production so that the cell has more ability to start to bind to these things that we probably don't want in the body. Sweating too, thinking of sitting in a sauna and letting the body naturally excrete things like cadmium, I know is really efficiently excreted in saunas. Shilajit might be a wonderful thing to take before and after a sauna, so that those free when those heavy metals are circulating, we don't want them to be reabsorbed or even stored in more delicate tissues like in the brain, because our body wisely packages up heavy metals in our fat and sometimes in our bones. So if we mobilize those, we want to bind to something. So I think Shilajit is a great option. Humic and fulvic acid is another option. Again, I know there's some controversy there, the pure form versus the process, but seeing what works for you. Candida overgrowth, any experience? Have a nice day. So yes, going back to the fungal overgrowth question, again, Candida overgrowth is normally a sign that the system is under a lot of stress and that there is some kind of metabolic slowdown. So we want to support that system by saying, hey, we're going to give you more fuel, not less. We're going to actually increase your carbs, whatever carbs you tolerate. And, if some gentle antimicrobials might be helpful, because Candida tends to come in tandem also with other fungal overgrowths and other bacterial overgrowths, because as that metabolic function has slowed down, oftentimes the gut motility slows down, and then bacteria start to creep back into the small intestines where we don't necessarily want them. So I would say check out my video on Candida treatments and see if that's helpful. Do you use some supplements, organic cocoa for taste and extra magnesium? Opinion. I do use some supplements. I am always experimenting and filling in gaps because, like I've shared, I am still dealing with symptoms. My body has a lot of residue from what it's been through, and I am always trying to feel better. I'm always trying to think again, how can I support my cells, especially considering years of endurance running and under eating and being so malnourished and so stressed out and just not knowing really anything about the nervous system or nourishment and how that connects to create a functioning system. So I personally am a big fan of supplementing with food first, but then finding creative ways to get the most bioavailable. So I'm a big fan of the magnesium glycinate. I like taking magnesium baths. I do better with magnesium chloride, rubbing on my skin. I consider coffee a supplement. I consider oysters and even butter I consider a supplement. What else? Playing around with methylene blue a little bit, and also playing around with the systemic enzymes to see if I can break up more of the scar tissue along my gut. So yes, I think there's a time and place for supplements, but we have to honor that the foundation is where it all starts. And that foundation, equally as important as nutrition, is what we're thinking. Maybe more important than nutrition is how we're thinking, what we're thinking. Because if we're eating oysters and liver and egg yolks and organic fruits, but we hate our lives and we hate ourselves and we hate our partner and our dog is terrible, that is only going to take us so far. So food first, mind first, and going from there. Thoughts on CBD, PUFA, for nighttime joint pain until root resolved alternatives? Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of CBD. I actually used to work for a CBD company and took mega doses of it until I started learning that it was a PUFA. I think, again, it has its time and place. It seems to work similarly to fish oil, actually, where at first it does have an anti-inflammatory effect, but then it seems to have a pro-inflammatory effect after a couple of weeks. So other options would maybe include, magnesium, a magnesium bath. I'm not sure if you've tried that, if that's been helpful. Again, starting low and slow. Again, these issues are more systemic than one quick fix. Starting to see if lowering iron levels might be helpful and balancing out those minerals. So something like the adrenal cocktail might help to keep your blood sugar balanced. That will keep the stress cascades low and allow your body to feel more nourished so that it can start maybe excreting some of the things that are not helping you. I'm also curious about if you just have a history of maybe Lyme or co-infections or certain parasites that might need addressing. But again, a lot of these issues, when we're metabolically robust, these little critters can't survive. So again, starting there, thinking about, okay, what do I maybe need to fill in? What do I need to maybe step away from right now, and seeing if this is helpful. But again, if CBD is working for you right now, again, there's a time and place for everything, and knowing that your body needs different things at different times. And again, what works for you might not work for me, and vice versa. Hi, trying to go metabolic, but it triggers IBS loose stools. Any tips, please? Yeah, so I'm curious, when you say metabolic, what that actually means, because I think a lot of people have the idea that, oh, okay, I get to drink Coke all day and ice cream all night, and I can drink a liter of orange juice and a gallon of milk. But I want to know if these foods are actually working for you, how often you're eating, what types of fibers you're eating, and what types of fibers you're not eating. If you're doing the carrot salad, and going from there, and also what you used to be eating, because say you were carnivore, as I was, and then switched to metabolic, the gut has so much adjusting to do. And especially if you're adding in milk for the first time, and say you've had SIBO for a while and aren't producing lactase, that can go either way with people. Some people get extreme diarrhea and just really loose stools. Their gut's pretty inflamed, so it's producing a lot of serotonin, which can cause pretty intense squeezing of the gut sometimes. So I would have to know more about what you're eating to answer this question, but I would say start paying attention to what foods actually feel really good and work well for you versus the foods that you think are just, pro-metabolic, and starting from there. If a reactive person keeps eating high histamine food, does this cause any negative long-term effect? Thinking about the effect of stress in the body, I think it will get to the point where you just don't crave that food because it doesn't feel good when you eat it. But oftentimes histamine reactions can get worse at first, especially considering that we often tend to go after histamine when in fact we have to be looking at blood sugar balance, stress load, and mineral balance, figuring out why the histamine response is so active. And, even something as simple as making sure your iodine levels are optimal can help lower the conversion of histidine, the amino acid, to histamine. Also thinking about copper. Are you producing enough DAO to break down these histamine foods? If not, starting to boost your copper with things like shellfish and shiitake mushrooms, and even bee pollen is a good source, and seeing if that starts to lower the reaction. And even taking kidney, some people do really well, taking even just desiccated kidney or full kidney and make like a stew and seeing if that starts to help. I personally do not like the taste of kidney, so that didn't work for me, but working more on blood sugar and mineral balance did. And brain rewiring, I would intentionally put myself in a state of parasympathetic dominance before eating a super reactive food to signal to my body that it was safe. And I just kept repeating that until I could slowly lower that reaction. Just wrote a post on this too, if you're interested. How do you start eating pro-metabolically when you've done paleo, low FODMAP, low, ... Yeah, patience, starting low and slow and gentle, because some people jump right in and might have crazy reactions, again, because their gut just is not ready, that maybe hasn't even produced a lot of these enzymes to be breaking down these foods. So that can be stressful in and of itself. I think also finding ways to understand what pro-metabolic means. Really, we're eating for energy, we're eating for heat, we're eating for that sense of calm, maybe even a slight elevation in pulse, just showing that the cell is able to take in the fuel. So finding someone that you trust that is willing to walk you through it if you need more one-to-one support, and going from there. But also trusting yourself too, because I think there's a lot of wisdom in the body that it naturally gravitates towards certain foods, certain eating schedules, that what looks pro-metabolic for someone else might look completely different for you. So stepping back and even starting with, okay, what feels good? And then slowly starting to add to that. And feel free to reach out if you're interested in certain courses or programs that could be helpful for you in this process. What's your opinion on weightlifting? So I personally love weightlifting as long as it's interesting. And I think it really depends. If an exercise is feeling joyful and stimulating and fun, I say go for it as long as you are able to recover from it. Again, if your pulses and temps are dropping afterwards and you feel terrible, or maybe the next morning after a certain workout you're not able to have a bowel movement and you just feel kind of wrecked, it might be worth scaling back. But muscle mass in general is very pro-thyroid, and muscle mass burns fat at rest. So I think it's a really supportive environment to be in a body. And even just thinking about, oh yes, for bone health, even just thinking about how the greater muscle mass will kind of speak to your bones. Those larger tissues will be pulling on your bones. So it has a bi-directional relationship. Stronger muscles means stronger bones. So thinking from the perspective of aging well and preventing osteoporosis, I think weightlifting is amazing. And it seems to be the least stressful on a system in terms of recovering, assuming that you're eating well, you're sleeping well, you're taking the time to repair those muscles, you're getting a beautiful balance of amino acids, not just muscle meat, not just broth, but a nice balance, and going from there. But really, when we think about exercise, I want to know how you feel about it, what your general health is, and yeah, how you feel afterwards and how you feel during. Because if you think about going to the gym and just kind of like working out and your mind's somewhere else and you kind of not enjoying it, and it's like, oh, I have to go to the gym, that's not doing you any good. Find ways that feel like, ooh, yeah, I cannot wait to put on that dance video, and forget the conditioning you've been told too about you should do this type of exercise versus how do I actually want to move? What feels functional? What feels good? How do I feel strong? And go from there. Is chin, under chin facial hair caused by hormone imbalance? Please explain. Thank you. Yeah, so in high stress states, it's called aromatization, but basically we start to notice that certain pathways are upregulated, and we even notice that the estrogen seems to kind of steal the show. And even under high stress, a lot of our androgenic hormones can be can start to aromatize into estrogen, and that's where we start to see some not so nice symptoms. But I would be curious about, yeah, just your stress load in general. But absolutely, I think whenever we're seeing, I mean, really, hormones dictate so much of our physiological processes. So whenever we're seeing growth in unexpected places, or lack of growth in certain places, we want to see, okay, what might be throwing off our hormonal balance? Is it something stress-based? Is it something we're eating? Is it something we're doing? And going from there. But I would really start to work on supporting your bowel movements, your liver function, and lowering stress in general. So even your protective sex steroids are not aromatizing into more stress-based hormones, or more, I guess estrogen is a stress hormone if you think about it, because under stress, even the liver will be producing more estrogen. And again, it's about the balance of estrogen to progesterone. And we want to make sure that it's in a good flowing balance throughout the month so that we feel good. We're not having symptoms. We're not growing hair. We're not losing hair. Growing hair on the chin, I should say. Any ideas on root causes, tips in managing hyperhidrosis? I've had it since I was little in my hands, feet. I actually do not know what this is, and thank you, because I now have something to research. How often do you recommend tapping? Every day? No, as much as you need it. I am a fan for using things as tools as long as they're helpful. You might be going through something significant or stressful, or working on a really outdated thought process and might need more at first, but you might be able to go weeks and weeks without any of it. So again, letting your body decide what's useful, what's not useful. Do you want to do it? Do you have fun doing it? And going from there. How did you find out you had scar tissue on your intestines? So I can feel it. I have been doing a lot of abdominal massage and trigger pointing. I can feel it breaking up. And when I was in kind of the deepest phase of my healing journey, I think I've mentioned many times before, I required colonics to basically survive because I had lost all gut motility. But I would have moments where even the water could not get through on the fill because the colon was so inflamed and so tight. And I've also had biopsies taken from the colon showing a lot of scar and damaging. So that's how I found out. But, everyone's different. Everyone has different journeys, and depends what the gut has been through, what the gut is working on, and ultimately knowing that the gut is just trying to heal. Hopefully it's trying to repair, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. Do you tell more about Lyme anywhere? I think you posted you had it. I dance around the topic of Lyme. Again, I think Lyme is just a reflection of a body that's been highly stressed, maybe really toxic, because a lot of these symptoms show up in certain people and not in others. And if you think about the Lyme community, there's also comorbidity of heavy metals, early life trauma, adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs, even mothers passing down Lyme to their children. So, I sprinkle information here and there. If you want specific information about how to test, what to look for, how to treat, I can dive into more detail there. But I firmly believe you can live a beautiful life with chronic Lyme by boosting the metabolic rate and nourishing the body so much so that these critters do not have a chance of really driving the show, because a lot of times too, they're coming to protect us. They see a body that's ripe with fermenting matter in the small intestines. They find a body that has a ton of mercury and heavy metals and maybe way too much iron. Maybe we have a lot of glyphosate from eating conventional foods when we were younger. So these critters come in almost to say, yum, delicious, let's feast. They mean no ill will. Can eating saturated fat with beans, lentils, etc. help reduce negative effects from PUFAs? So there is some research showing that vitamin E can help with preventing the damage that the PUFAs cause, and exactly why a lot of these nuts and seeds are also really rich sources of vitamin E, because nature is wise and knows that, things need to come in tandem. I would say saturated fat could block some of that. It just depends what you've been eating for most of your life and how often you're eating these beans and lentils and such. Niacinamide can also be helpful too in shifting the use of fuel towards more of the carbohydrate and less towards burning the polyunsaturated fats, because again, we don't necessarily want to burn through them in the body. It's the safer option to store them, but then under stress the free fatty acid levels rise and we start burning through them, and that's where we start to see more damage at a tissue and cell level. Do you ever take cascara still? Yes, I do. So I write about this a lot. There's a very long post on my blog, and it's one of those tools for me that has been life-saving. And again, I don't see it as a lifelong option. I don't see it as something that I will plan to be taking for the rest of my life, but it's something that is very helpful for me. And there's so many benefits beyond just bowel movements that cascara can help with in terms of lowering inflammation, helping with the metabolism, helping the liver, helping with bile flow. It can even prevent certain spike proteins, which are associated with COVID infections. So something to think about there. Final question is, what are your diagnoses and remaining symptoms? And it's a really personal question. I am in the mindset now that whatever diagnoses I still have, I'm determined to free myself from them, because I feel like so many of these layers on layers of labels that we get can cause so much stress and harm to the system that maybe it starts to believe, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, like, oh, I was told and tested positive for Lyme and all these co-infections, I'm going to be chronically ill for the rest of my life. And just an example, I was told that I had early onset ovarian failure and that I would be infertile for the rest of my life, and spent about 7.5 years believing this. But recently just discovered that that is not true. I, in fact, am fertile. So that is kind of a cool thing for me to say, wow, things do change. Whatever these doctors have told me, whatever these tests have told me, are not my destiny. Genes are not my destiny. And, a lot of people in the neuroscience field, Joe Dispenza is one of my favorites, but talk about that the cells, the body can't tell the difference between something that's happened in the past, something that's imagined, and we can start to imagine these future outcomes and almost prime the body that they're already true, as if we're imprinting to say, hey, you're actually healthier than you think you are, and start finding little tools to actually make that a reality. Because when we think terrible things are going to be happening, that sets off a stress cascade. And of course, the body's going to start adapting by releasing all these stressful chemicals and hormones and breaking down tissue to free up fuel and, putting other long-term projects on hold like fertility and hair growth. But when we trust that we have this sense of adaptability and this sense of resiliency in us, and that healing is possible, those cells are listening. The cells are always listening. So I like to always remember that our thoughts are so powerful. And if we're going to be thinking thoughts, we might as well be thinking ones that feel good and have beautiful rippling effects on our bodies. So that's my answer. Hope you guys enjoyed these. Thanks for watching.
Some scrub, Jay. We've got some plank, some learning, got some videos, some slippers.